Welcome, everybody, to Educational Triage. This is Tony, and I am, of course, joined with the wonderful Philip Summers. Hey, Philip.
Aloha. How are you doing, Tony?
I am well. I'm a little tired, but such is life,
Such is
right?
life. It's almost energizing springtime. So
It is. I mean, you can hear autumn panting,
that's true. Autumn
and
the
you are sitting there petting your cat,
dog, my comatose cat.
your comatose cat.
He's snoring, actually. I was worried he might get picked up. There might be a little buzz in the background. My cat snores.
Oh. Well, today, I came across an article the other day, and it was called 40 years ago, a nation at risk warned of a rising tide of mediocrity in U.S. schools. Has anything changed? Because we've been through some big reforms, and you and I have been able to work through a lot of that. And has it been worth it? And so this came from the article is in the newsletter called The Conversation. And it was written by Morgan Polikoff, who's an associate professor of education at the University of Southern California. And what did you think? First of all, what did you think of the article? And then we'll get into the meat of it, because now we're just admiring our dishes before we tuck in.
The dishes.
Yes.
Well, I made the mistake of refreshing myself too with the whole thing, because I'd sort of lost it all in the time, and it came around in '83, I believe, or something like that, and shocked us all. And I liked the path that we took is interesting. I have a problem with a lot of people that the standards changed. And in an effort to sort of standardize the standards, it's sort of like they changed from place to place. It's hard to explain.
What do you mean?
There's a better thesis on it. Well, for example, when Ronald Reagan got all behind that, he wanted to keep the states. He got rid of the Department of Education, of course. And,
right.
Then he made the states more responsible for the curriculums and the freedom to have the curriculum. And at the same time, it's sort of tightened everyone's focus on standards. But what they were standards that sort of didn't match each other. And like the core curriculum eventually came through, and that was adapted by, well, how many states went with it? There was only a few exceptions at the end. There's a few exceptions to core curriculum. There was a few holdouts, but as time
there were
went
35.
by slowly, 35, that's what it was. Yeah.
Right. That joined in.
And then it sort of fractured a touch because of the 15. So I guess my point is this, that the way that it's measured, if we made the improvements at all or addressed it, sort of is not standardized. They're not as consistent as they can be.
Tell me more.
Well, I mean, as I said, we went with standards, and we got No Child Left Behind, which was an effort to sort of focus all the curriculum.
Right, but that came
mediocrity out. Yeah.
Right, but that came like almost 2 decades later.
Correct. And we're talking about where we are now, though. Yeah. But at the time, there was a focused effort to raise up mediocrity, but it was a lot of publicity in a lot of ways too. And then, as in now, they were measuring on test scores that their parents had done, like back in the '60s, like 15 years before or so. And they'd saying that the test scores had sunken greatly, had failed, had gone down greatly, and that was there was a need for alarm, and we might be falling behind other nations.
Right.
And so the standard there was, what were they actually comparing those tests to then and now, 1983, 82 to 65-ish, for example. And so is that a comparable fair measure? And then since then, having raised the alarm and the movements forward, has there been a consistent fair measure moving forward to see if the mediocrity has left the system. And I
Right.
would say that's inconsistent as all craziness. It's like I can't find. I know what the data is. I knew what they were testing against in the
Hmm.
from the '60s, and there's a lot of data that says that's not the best measure of the 1960s, for example. It depends on what you look at, but I
Right.
don't quite know
And
where
the
we go from
70s.
here. Pardon me?
And the 70s.
Yeah, in the '70s,
Because
but
why would they skip a decade?
well, the '70s are sort of like the decline of education or something. It's like I didn't get a lot of, I should look more into data in the '70s, but I'm not sure what test scores to look up. I mean, how do you measure school performance? You and I
Well,
both know
that's
it's very independent.
well, actually, that's something that you and I have been talking about for quite some time, and that
Correct.
is how unreliable test scores actually are.
Yeah, and depending on which ones you want to use, and
Hmm.
exactly. And
Right.
so now they're standing here after all that time, and have we addressed the problem? And I would say that I don't know if there's a way to comparably or to effectively look backward on it
Right.
and say yes, or look, we made this gain or that gain. I do know politically what happened. It was very interesting, but yeah, as far as like realistic gains or losses, I'm not quite sure how to measure those.
Hmm. So let's take a look at what
Yeah,
the most important points were from a nation at risk.
yeah. Let's just go through that.
Okay. The first one is American education is in a crisis.
Yeah,
And that had to do with just basic test scores and the competencies, I believe, as compared to other nations.
yeah. I think those were the other nation scores, and so we were falling behind. Yeah, I remember
Right.
that
And it
Japan.
says here that the factors were declining test scores,
Mm-hmm,
lack of rigorous standards,
mm-hmm,
and greater, let's see, and a gap between the performance of white students and minority students. So the achievement gap.
yeah, yeah.
So it says that the crisis threatens the nation's economic security and social fabric, that the nation must take steps to address the crisis, including increasing funding for schools, more rigorous standards, and greater parental involvement. And I think these are all things that we're going to have to talk about anyway. And the report
Funny.
argues that students should be accountable for their own learning. And then that would probably be actually that's where okay, so those are the most salient points.
Yeah,
And
and we
then
would agree.
the article comes back and says that some progress has been made since that was published, but that there's still a lot of work to be done. Uh, it cites declining test scores, a lack of rigor in the curriculum, and a gap between the performance of white students
Mm-hmm,
and minority students as some of the challenges still facing them.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
and that even though we've made this huge leap, in a sense, to close the achievement gap, it's still there. Um, the There is also, let's see, I'm trying to find my notes. Okay, there's still a gap between wealthy families and poor students. So the big thing that I think that we need to look at though is that if
mm-hmm,
we take a look at these, um, we will see that the dropout rate has gone from 14% to 6%, if not better, which is huge.
that's true. That is true. It has gone down.
So why don't we take a look at the declining test scores? Because reading and math, there were huge gains that were made in reading and math, and then all of a sudden we have learning loss, and the learning loss happened at the end of the pandemic.
So they say. Yeah, that's the big thing. I'm not entirely sure again what they're basing that on, except for just time out of classes.
No,
But
they're basing it on pre-lockdown scores
Yeah,
and return to school scores.
sure.
So they're taking a look at that, whether or not the kids are proficient or not, because how many kids were actually online learning
Oh, yeah, yeah.
with their computers, and how many of them were unsupervised and just playing video games or out just doing whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah, the
And
blank screen.
yeah, and they just kind of went off and lived life as they saw it fit, right?
Yeah, there was a loss in learning per se, and the test scores do show it. There's also so many things going on too. I fear the reaction to that loss of learning. I've actually heard reports is doubling down on school time, taking away free time, recesses, things like that. And I'm going, no, no, pull up, pull up. That's the wrong approach. We're just going to get more schooly. It's like, ooh,
Yeah.
have you noticed the kids are kind of going, I don't know if I like this school thing. And you're going to
Well,
get more schooly.
they became more schooly because I
It's
don't
getting the
know
tool.
whether or not that they took into account any form of child psychology when they started getting more schooly, as you call it. Okay.
Yeah, just business like.
I mean, what do kids want to do? They want to play.
Yes, they do.
They
And they want to
they have so
socialize.
much energy that they need
Yes,
to be able to blast it out, so to speak,
they do.
through recess. I mean, when I would go to school, we would be playing on the playground first thing in the morning, then we'd go into our classrooms, we'd have a little bit of learning, we'd do whatever, and then we'd blast back out. Then we'd come back in, do more learning, and then we would have lunch, and then we would have more recess, and then we'd go back in the room, and then we'd have one more recess, and then we'd do some more. And by that time, we were exhausted and we went home.
Yep, I remember that.
And
It
I
wasn't
don't
perfect, but I
remember.
liked it.
Hmm?
It wasn't perfect. I'm not saying it's the good old days. It wasn't the good old days, but there certainly was lots of room to blow off that energy. Yeah.
There was. And what they say is that it allows students the time to process the information that they've had in the morning and to
Yeah.
reset so that they're ready. And you have fewer instances of ADHD. You have, I mean,
Yeah.
mentally, socially, everything. It's all right there. That's where you take care of the majority of it because they're doing social interactions.
Yeah.
And the problems with kids now is the fact that they're all so locked in on their games. They're so locked in on social media, on their phones. Their parents are on their phones
Yeah.
and on their screens. And so, how much conversation actually happens in the home? And sure, I know you can say, well, not in my house. Well, we're not talking about you then. We're talking about the vast majority. Talking about the mothers who are breastfeeding while they're scrolling on their phones and their kids are looking at them to try to create a bond with them. And so they're not able to create a bond because the mother is not looking at them. And that's one of the most important things. There are all kinds of missing pieces in a child's life now because of technology.
Yeah. That is true. That is true.
So, and back when Nation at Risk came out, sure, there was that call, and as we talked about with teachers' rights, that there had been a decline prior to that in teacher recruitment. They were having a hard time with it. And then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
this became the battle cry, and more people came in and they started saying, I'm carrying the flag. I'm going to teach. This is my calling. I really want
Yeah.
to get in there. I want to help. I want to be there for that. So, uh,
It's ironic
mm-hmm.
because at that particular period of time, the groundwork was being laid for the underfunding and the devaluation that we're facing now.
Right. So, and we talked about that in our last two-parter where we talked about the funding and the infrastructure and everything else. And
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about equity, you got to be talking about funding, because why are the wealthier schools getting more money than the lower socioeconomic serving schools? Why do, and same thing with the staff. Why aren't those staff all the way across? Why aren't we treating everybody equally? And everybody, and you know what? I can ask those questions and I will get 100 different responses from people.
But I think you'll probably get them within the framework of the same idea set. And I think that idea set's coming kind of old. It's getting old, the old, well, yeah, but it's a waste of money. Or, oh, you're right, but I don't want my taxes raised. Or, no, I just don't want to pay for that, inside the back of their head, thinking about the question that requires more funding to be answered.
Mm-hmm.
They're still going, yep, but I'm still not going to put any money into that. And it's
Wait,
sort of like a sort of a kind of a brain, a zeitgeist. It's like a belief
yeah.
that no, it's just not worth the money. Although I'll say it's worth the money, I won't really give it the money.
Well, saying that you are going to fight for schools,
Mhm.
I'm going to say is a political gaslight,
Yes. Oh gosh, yes.
because the politicians are the ones who are sucking the money and siphoning it away from the schools for
Yeah.
other projects. It's the same old scam.
It
They
is. It
they
really
bring
is.
something up for a vote and they say this is for the children. So, what I caution people to do is to read the fine print, because you will find that 5 to 10%, if even that much, goes to the children. The rest goes elsewhere. So, I mean, it's that I my who was it? It was a family member, and he and his wife, they were talking and they said, "Yeah, we're going to vote for that because it's for the kids." And I said, "Did you read it closely? How much of that money is going for the kids?" And so I
Mhm.
tossed the
Mhm.
voters pamphlet there and they stared at me and they looked at it and they're like, "No, we can't vote for it." Most people don't read the voters pamphlet though.
Yeah, they don't.
And and other people say, "Well, even if 5 or 10% is going for the kids, that's enough." And you think, really?
Well, the
Really?
problem too is that, at least in the state of Oregon, the way it was, still is, that there's that bond, and that bond doesn't pay for teachers. It pays for like the new facility or it
Mm-hmm.
pays for stuff. It doesn't pay for people. And people don't understand that. Well, I just paid for that, bond. Doesn't that take care of it? No, that's not for teachers. That was for a new school or improvements to the older one. And
That
and it
those
has
are
to be done
usually
that way.
right. Those are usually for infrastructure.
Yeah. So it gets you a nice school district, but it doesn't give you those teachers that everyone knows makes the world
Right.
go round.
Right. So now let's talk about the next piece I'm going to talk about with this is the parental involvement, because it says that we need to have more parental involvement. Now, right now, as you know, they passed a bill, the Parents' Rights Bill, in education. And there are a
Mhm.
lot of people who are furious about it and other people
Mhm.
who are just going crazy over the whole thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm going to say that the solution is actually somewhere in the middle. That it's not, I've seen teachers who are furious because how dare a parent come in to their classroom or tell them what they can teach when they're the ones with the advanced degree. So they
Mm.
know better. Well, that's I'm going to have to say that somebody's suffering from a bit of hubris there,
Oh, yeah.
because
I wouldn't pretend to do that.
because you're supposed to be in charge of my kid. And so I want to know what's going on with my kid
Yeah.
and how my kid is doing there. There's some parents who really don't care. There's some parents who just figure that, if their kids are acting like little piranhas feeding on a steak all day, just going
Mm.
half crazy and just being destructive, they don't care about that. They care about what materials you're using. That's not okay either.
Yeah.
But
I don't think that, I think that parental bill of rights is just it's meaningless and it's a political football.
It is.
because yeah, if you come into me and say, "Hey, I've had actually a parent say just once when I was showing, they were in the room and I was showing old racist ads, no less, of back in the Durham tobacco and, just very, very horrible African American images, the art, sure am sweet and all that. And, it portrays all the stereotypical stuff, the watermelon eating. It's awful. And these were in drugstore windows, and I was showing the kids this, and um, one of the parents didn't quite understand. She's like, what is that? And I had to explain, oh, that's a lesson. We're studying, how people change and how we accept things and mores over the years. This used to be acceptable, and then of course, get to the '60s where the little lady's staying at home, doing the laundry, get her a new washing machine. That's just a tad sexist there. But we get better as we get older and wiser, supposedly. So I was just making that note. But one parent went, "Holy cow, what the heck is that?" And I don't blame
Well,
her.
well, there's an evolution.
Yeah, yeah,
There's an evolution. I mean, the men no longer go out with big clubs and spears and
yeah.
bows
Well,
and
they don't all
try
wear
to.
those ties. They don't wear hats to work anymore. That's for sure.
Well, some do,
The
but
'60s. Well, in the
it's
'60s, that hat thing and
yeah,
it's a
the
big
Darbies,
deal. Yeah, I mean they had a style, and guys don't do that anymore. It was
right?
definitely men style. Yeah,
No, that's true. I mean, things do
yeah,
change.
they do
But if a
change.
parent came in and asked me what I was teaching, I have had no problem with that and discussing it
I
with
have
them.
no problem.
Because if you have a problem explaining to a parent what it is you're doing, now, the one thing I do
Yeah,
take issue with are the parents who got the superintendent or something fired for showing
David.
Michelangelo's David.
I've heard about that stuff all my life. Every about 20
But
years it comes up.
but that kind of censorship is not new.
No, it
There
isn't
were
new.
people screaming about a print of a Botticelli print
Yeah,
showing showing the cherubim in the newspaper, and they were talking about how that was pornographic. So that's when you have a teachable moment and you can talk about what is art.
yeah, yeah. That's true. I was going to say you don't talk about what is porn per se, but what is art?
No, 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 no.
Because that's true. You don't want to go that way. But I was just thinking when I was a kid, there was this game called Masterpiece, and it's the weirdest
I
game
have
for kids. You had it.
I
You had
have
the
it.
paintings and all that. You still have it.
And the forgeries and
Yeah, you got a
yeah,
forgery.
I have it in the
Yes,
box completely
there it is.
together
Oh,
in my closet out there.
I have the cards somewhere. I bought the set. I had it, and then I have I have all the cards now. But yeah, there was, as I recall, I think there was a great work of art with some nudity, and and I was just playing,
Nudity?
mastery. Yeah, it
Did
was
you say nudity?
nudity. Yeah, there was nudity in there. I can't remember which one. I think David, a picture of David. No, he had to be a painting. So what it was, I can't recall. But nudity it was always understood that that was not porn, that was art.
It's the human form. What's going to happen in
Yes, it's
biology class when they have to talk about
that's
the
yeah.
reproductive organs and the
I saw a
body and everything
biology
else?
book, for that matter, at that
Right.
age too. So there you go. Yeah, exactly. So,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
how you got in trouble for showing David? I don't know. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's
Well,
one of the
parents
most
complained.
beautiful works of art in all of history. It's something to behold. I don't know, and he did it out of marble. Good God, jeez, it's absolutely magnificent. He carved it out of stone. Wow, I'm impressed. But yeah,
Well,
it's
yeah,
just
I mean, because he did some delicate features in there. I mean,
yeah.
even his nether regions are small,
Yeah, they're
and they,
small. Yeah,
yeah, and they are intricate. So,
yeah. I mean, the guy's cut. It's like, no, I'd be the giant. I'd turn and go, no, you win. Yeah, I'm gone.
can you imagine how that would have been destroyed had he made a wrong thing with the chisel and the hammer?
Yes, I mean, I know. I don't even fathom how he did that, and it's so beautiful. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, it's just beautiful in craftsmanship and in conception and in fiber and form and everything. It's
Well,
amazing.
it's a testament to the abilities that people had.
Yeah, and to think that that's pornographic in any way, I don't think you're getting it.
Right,
You're missing the whole human point, I think.
right. So parental involvement, I mean, if parents want to be involved, then that's great. If you want to involve parents by sending out, say, a newsletter saying this is what we're doing, contact me via X and we can have a conversation, or just start up a forum or
Mhm.
something where you can get in there. And that way, anybody who has any, they're putting out some bad mojo out there, you can put a damper on it really quickly.
Right.
But I think that is one area that I think has really gotten, um, and we've talked about this time and time again. I think this is something that has really gotten out of hand, with people saying no and people saying yes, and you know, just
There's some
not being able to.
extremes on both sides.
Exactly.
There's some
So,
books being, uh, there that are, would make me uncomfortable as a parent. Not that I want to ban books, but it's like, you sure this is maybe high school level, maybe college level, but it also depends on the kid.
yeah,
So generally speaking, teachers don't assign a real uber controversial novel for everybody.
I
They
I taught my students. I think I brought this up.
yeah.
This story of Epiphany by James Joyce, which is
Yeah,
pretty much like 2 or 3 pages, maybe 4.
yeah.
And it's all about teaching what is an epiphany. If somebody has an epiphany in literature, and they were ninth graders. Well, I had one parent who went ballistic, had never read it,
Yeah.
but they were a televangelist, and they sort of lost it because how dare you teach my child James Joyce? And I said, I'll talk to you, and let's have a conversation about it. Have you read it? And he said, no, I don't need to read it. And I said, well, why don't you read it, or ask your son to just explain it to you? And I never heard from him again.
Hmm.
So sometimes ignorance can be the biggest enemy.
It's really something to oppose an idea. Contempt without prior investigation.
Yes. That I like that phrase. Okay. So let's take a look at learning loss, and everything that we've done. Have we really made huge gains in reading, writing, and arithmetic? And
Have we? No, I was thinking arithmetic. Arithmetic's always been hard.
well, for me, it has been.
Like forever,
I think
just generous.
eventually, once I get everything else, kind of leveled off, I'm going to start looking at some courses so I can reteach myself some algebra, go into algebra 2, maybe do some geometry, and then get into some of the higher maths, just to kind of get everything going, just for my own edification, I think.
Hmm.
Um, but if you think about it, back in the old days, some people said that they were terrible with math, but the truth is with math, you just don't get it until you get it.
Yeah, and that's what I was sort of getting at was, um, punny, that we're, as a nation, we've never really been proficient, like at math. We've always thought we're behind in math, we're behind in math. And I'm thinking, as a race, as a species, as a being, as a general, not, I got rid of race, but as general humans, I don't think many of us are inclined, as many, toward math. I think there's a minority of people, that are comfortable with it and kind of speak it real well, and the rest of us, dabble in it to varying degrees. I don't think it's ever really been a general aptitude. I can do mathematics, and I've done it for a career and things, and had to be accurate, like medical math and things.
Right.
But I mean, I would never dream of going into engineering. It's like, oh wow,
Funny
I
story.
don't think that way per se.
This is the person who barely passed geometry and algebra 2.
Yeah, I've never
And
took them.
and I was I was offered a job as an engineer, and they were going to send me back to school to get my engineering degree.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh no, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do any of that. No, 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 no.
No, it just doesn't
But
float your boat.
well, it would, it would have been interesting, but I think I would have been stressed out because having to go back to school because I was done with school, and then having to, it would have been a torture chamber with the mathematics. And a few years later, I was studying accounting. I was going to go in for an MBA, and and that was part of it. I needed to have these accounting classes to get in there, and I took one at Berkeley, and it was just, I was left in a puddle. I didn't do well. Now, if you gave it, and I was doing bookkeeping for people, and there were things that I just wasn't getting. But I think now, if I were to do it, yeah, because it would have more practicality and more relevance to me. But I just wasn't ready at that time for it. So, and I think those are the two biggest components. What's the relevance of what it is that you're learning, and how how ready are you in order to take those on? So, and I'm not
Well,
saying,
there it is.
and I don't think that we have it in our culture to do math or anything. I think for a long time, and you might find this other people agreeing with it, but I think we went with the lowest common denominator and tried to work our way up rather, because I've seen this in classrooms where you teach to the lowest common denominator. You don't teach and then help kids get up there, because if they don't have to do anything in order to figure stuff out and they don't see it as achievable, then it's boring, and why would they want to do it? But if you have something and you find those little ledges, and you start getting them to climb up those ledges, and you're there and they feel supported, then I think they're going to get there.
But there's
It's
also
teaching
that
to
aspect.
excellence.
I was that one kid that they were trying to bring up, I think. I may be
Mm-hmm.
wrong, but I wasn't that good at it. In any case, it put a spotlight on me as far as like you said it yourself, you have to get it when you get it. And I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
getting it. And I wasn't for lack of trying. I would have done anything at that time to get it. I just wasn't understanding it. And to this day, it's always been kind of like that. It's like, okay, I work with a concept, work with a concept. I kind of get them later. I mean, after I'm out of the class and I live some
Mm-hmm.
life, I go, hey, I'm kind of understanding how that works now. I think I would take the class again. I'd probably do
Well,
better.
right, because you've had time to process it.
Yeah, I use it a little bit. Hey, that now I kind of understand it. But for a grade and like, an exercise, it was like, oh, help.
Well, here's the odd part, and that is, the entrance exam in order to get into the School of Education in Oregon maybe it still is, I don't know, was the CBEST, the California Basic Education Skills
Yeah,
Test.
which I actually,
And I looked at somebody who was a bit of a nerd that I kind of sort of knew, and I said, "Hey, if I pay you, will you tutor me in the math so that I can get through this?" Because I had the study guides and everything, and I wasn't sure that I could do it. He got me going, and all of a sudden I realized I knew this stuff, and it just started falling right into place. And I'm thinking to myself, why didn't this happen when I was in high school? I could have used those grades.
I could use this ease, less stress. Hey, well, I
Yeah.
didn't do it. I passed the CBEST, but
Oh, I
um,
did too.
I don't
But,
remember.
and I got a high score on my math. But I remember taking geometry, and I remember I was on the phone with one of my friends, Karen Basta, and we were on the phone trying to figure out some of these problems in geometry. And all of a sudden I said, "What if?" And she goes, and I said, oh my God, we got it. We've got it." And she's like, "Yeah, yeah." So we were pumped. We walked into class the next day. We're just like puffing out our chest. And it's like, we finally got it. Oh, yeah, baby. And we looked up, and our teacher, Mr. Utter, I kid you not, that was his name. He was from Australia. He was a visiting teacher. Mr. Utter, spelled as in a cow's udder. He said, who would like to come up here and put it up on the board? And Karen and I are like, yeah.
We can
So
do
he called
this.
on me. So I went up there and I did it. And I turned around and there were all these mouths that looked like they were ready to swallow something, but they weren't sure what it was. And their eyes were kind of, what? And Karen's just sitting there beaming, and I'm beaming. And Mr. Utter looked at me and said, what is this? And I said, the answer. And he said, how did you get that? And I said, it's all right there. All the work is all right there. Got it. And I could see Karen's face was starting to fall a little bit. And I was like, no. He just doesn't understand. And then he said, who else would like to come up? And of course,
yes.
another friend of mine who was good at math said, I'll do it. He came up there and he did it. And I sat there and I looked at it and I looked at Karen and I looked at mine. And I'm like, I don't get it. I just don't get it. How did you get that?
I can see my answer, somebody's right answer. I can see my work doesn't match their work. Now I don't get it. It's like I'm back to score zero. It wasn't like I made
no idea how you
progress.
Right. How you even got that. And then we had to learn the postulates and the theorems and everything because we had to write proofs.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And my brother looked at me and said, dude, it's all about logic. And I said, it's not about logic, because if it was logical, then I would get it right off the bat. It would have like a boom, 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 boom.
I like logic.
So anyway.
What's that say about me? Oh, God. It's, math.
Yeah.
Math has revealed to me many things about my psyche. But see, and so I'm saying that when we're trying to pump up those grades in math and those scores in math, I don't think we've ever really been able to, because I think most of America is like you and I.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. But we do get it.
We eventually
do.
Right. We do. And
we do eventually get it. But then there's so many people who are so turned off by it that they are, one, not going to class, so of course they're not going to ingest it. Two, they fail it because it's not a safe environment for them to try anything, even though I know some incredible teachers who are there constantly, ready to work with the students. And I've had students who said, yeah, I go up there, but they're not there. And I call the teacher and they say, yeah, we were here, but here are the days that we are here. And this is the time that I can do it, because they've only got so much time anyway. And the kid's like, yeah, well, that doesn't work for me. And like,
I lived in the tutoring center in college most of the time for just the math grade, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So
the reading and writing,
there has to be a way. And one thing that I think would be really helpful is if schools had peer-to-peer tutoring.
Oh, that would be nice. But how are you going to reward the peer that tutors? Yeah, that would be nice. But how do you reward the peer that tutors?
Well, I think that if they are, well, maybe they get credit at the end of the year.
Well, I would love to say they get credit, but most schools won't do it.
Well, then
they might give them like an aid thing, but they don't really. And I think, geez, man, you teach best what you most need to learn. If you're out teaching kids math,
there's a teacher that I know who became a math teacher, is one of the most loved math teachers in her school. And that's exactly why she became a math teacher, was because she could not figure it out. So she became a math teacher just so she could figure it out.
That would be something I could do. If I could do math, I would love to do something like that, because it would be very nice to help people like me.
And I remember Sister Mary Ellen in 9th grade, and no Cheech and Chong jokes, because that was the same time that Cheech and Chong came out.
Oh, yeah, Ellen. Yeah, it was.
She said, the best teachers are the ones who go into something that they don't understand, because they have to learn it themselves. So, okay. So reading and writing.
Well, yeah. And I was a little worried about it.
You're worried about reading and writing?
Have you seen texting? Have you seen posts?
Here's the problem with writing is, one, punctuation.
Yeah. What punctuation?
Two, because remember, we were working with some kids who just really couldn't even piece a sentence together.
Yeah, I didn't know which words indicated which words to go in which order,
Right.
and
So
it
they
was
were
something
missing a
else.
lot of
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
And it's and it's like, come on, you read, right? Well, the way you learn how to write is by reading. And so having the kids read, 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 and then ask them to write. I had kids who told me that they couldn't write. So one thing I made them do was every time we had a test in English class, guess what they had to do? An essay
right.
test.
Yeah, you always have to
Is
write.
an essay test.
Yeah, I hated it too, but I
So,
make my students do it. Yeah.
but as I tell them, writing is talking, but
Yes.
on paper.
Don't write and because I've actually had kids write and wrote and I had the kid he was writing that. I can't remember what it's called in speech. It's got a name, but yeah, they wrote out their stutter and it's like, no, you don't have to actually write your stutter. You can lose that in your writing
Well,
form.
they also ask, can I just dictate it to my computer? And it's like, no.
No,
If you're going to
no.
type it, but don't get it off of something else.
Yeah,
But
that's not. You have to develop a voice first, and that's called writing.
right. But I start at the beginning. We talk about webbing and how webbing can then turn into and organizing can turn into an outline and all of that. And I heard from a student last night who I taught over 10 years ago
Hmm.
who told me that he still uses all of this in his writing. He loves writing. He hated writing. And then
Yeah,
one
man.
day he turned something into me, and I guess I made some kind of a comment because he didn't believe in himself. And I said something to him, and he said that turned him around. And
Gosh.
it was just one of those moments where you realize, yeah, I did do something.
Yeah, and that's the moment. I can't remember what it was I said, but he said I said this or something, and it changed him. Like, hey, that's why I
Yeah.
do this.
But the testing, I think the testing is something else that we need to look at because how are we testing? What are we testing?
I know it disturbs the heck out of me. I don't. I don't think you can measure the human intelligence at with all the different factors, the age, the socioeconomic status, the funding, the this, the that, or
Mm-hmm.
even two persons that are like living in the same situation. They were different individuals, and how do you test for that? I mean, I know how I've made improvements in my life, but I know also that no one has made improvements in their life like I've made mine. Therefore, are mine unmeasurable? Or, you know what I'm saying? It's
Right.
how do you measure humans? It's tough. I really resist it. And when they start going, and this policy indicates that test scores that are, we're not doing so well. I'm like, but what test
Well,
scores
it
said
depends
I
on what we
wasn't
are
very good?
measuring for.
Exactly. And
So
yeah, the whole premise of it makes
I
me just
think
crazy.
maybe with the billions of dollars that the testing industrial complex has come out with, that they earn every year, that they should be able to figure out a way to test kids in so many different areas, in so many different ways.
And what are they
I
testing
mean,
for? Yeah.
just think about how much money that they're getting, and it's still the same method of testing. They have not changed that. So
Yeah,
maybe
I
the
don't think
method
so.
of testing, maybe that's what needs to change right now. Maybe
Tell
that's
me
a big
about it.
one. But then we get back to the funding and the infrastructure, and we look at the lower SES, socioeconomic system, status, kids, and we look at why aren't they able to progress higher.
Right.
And then there are people in the public sector who say, well, we're trying to do what we can. And then for some reason or other, there is let's say, a charter school that opens up and the kids run. And so now the public schools have competition, and are they keeping up? So, because those teachers aren't making quite as much money as the public school teachers, but what's the big difference? Is that the parental involvement? Is that the parental involvement
Oh,
that we're
it's all
talking about?
structured
Where
much
the
different.
where
Yeah.
the parents are being supportive of the students and the school. And so the kids do
Ideally,
not want, yeah,
it's small environment. If you're going to one
that
of the
too.
bigger institutional high schools, then you're stuck in that system. The bell rings, the school's run by the bus schedule. The heck with the
You
kids and
betcha.
the teaching thing, it's the bus schedule. And so you're
Hmm.
running a big building like that. It's not going to be as good a learning experience as a charter school.
Right. And it's basically all about compliance. So he says one thing in this
Academically, I might say.
article that really got to me. And I think it's a great summation for where we are today. And he says the result of all these trends is that the reform consensus that brought about a broadly national approach to education reform, because when
Yeah,
up
yeah.
until recently, really, you had both sides of the aisle coming together to work on these policies.
They both agree on that one. Yeah.
They did. They did. So a broadly national approach to education reform is splintering into red state, blue state versions. He predicts, I expect red state reform will likely emphasize school choice and back to basics curriculum focused on reading, math, and the avoidance of controversial topics. I expect blue state reform will likely emphasize whole child supports like mental health, social emotional learning, and curriculum that is intended to reflect the culture of the nation's increasingly diverse student body.
Yes.
My question is, what is the purpose of the school? And if we're talking about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and just having those core subjects, why aren't why can't we do that, but we're also modeling the others? And with SEL or social emotional learning, why aren't we working on that in practice rather than in small sessions in the classroom? And what is it that we're doing? Are we doing things that are really benefiting the children, or are they benefiting a political ideology that we want to impart because we're in a school and we feel that that's the important piece of it? So my job is to educate children. My job was to educate them initially as an English teacher, as a speech teacher, as a humanities teacher, as a writing, whatever it was that I was hired to do. Then all of a sudden we have all these social addendums that came on board. And my question is, at what cost? At what cost are we doing that? And is it benefiting the children, or is it benefiting something that we need for ourselves?
I think it's overall a politically driven sort of agenda, and the kids are stuck in the middle.
Right. And so the question then is that why we have so much conflict between the parents and the teachers and the schools? Because the kids are, by and large, their property. So are we entering into the nanny state that we talked about years ago? And so now we're going into some sort of dystopian incubator series where the kids are going to be raised by other people, and we just pay those other people to do it because all the parents are then are breeders and earners who then just commit the kids into the system to come out as processed by whomever as
Right.
whatever they need.
Well, yeah, I think we defend that system. I think deep down inside, our society doesn't want to let go of that system, that school system, the one that's breaking. They want to send their kids to the school, and the schools want to be big. They want to teach basically pre-college or academics.
Mm-hmm.
They want to ignore vocation.
Mm-hmm.
They want to test and artificially measure, the progress of each individual there against each other. And deep down inside, we don't want to make the radical changes it's going to take to get rid of that system that's been around for 40, geez, 170 some years now.
Actually, it's been just a
Prussian,
little over 100 years. Remember, we talked about that. That was in the
yeah.
Nicole Goyle
But the
book.
Prussian models in there,
The
they
Prussian
started
model,
about the
it's over
1840s, wasn't it? When they started
1827.
imitating factories, basically going,
The
"Hey, let's
Prussian
make a kid
army.
factory." Yeah,
It was the Prussian army.
yeah. So it's been
So,
so long. I mean, good sakes.
mhm.
Like I said, we're talking about banning Chat GPT in a public school. That got talked about and actually done. It'll get undone, but you can't step in the way of that stuff.
Well, I think ChatGPT is actually a very useful tool.
Oh, very.
And
Yeah.
so Microsoft has their version, Google now has their version.
And
Everybody's
it's here to
coming out with
stay.
their own versions of it. So, I mean, the best thing to do is to get out there and experiment with that. The other, you reminded me of another point that I meant to get to, and that is um, the skills. Students are leaving unskilled. They don't have the skills for vocations. They don't have the skills for jobs. And so then we started promoting the STEM, but we got rid of all the vocations. But people's toilets still get clogged, and so do their sinks. People's pipes burst. Who are you going to call? You're going to call a STEM, somebody who's in an engineer to come over and do it for you?
They're
No,
going to
you
tell
got to
you
have a
why it
plumber.
broke. It's broken. Here's why. Now I'll see you.
I mean, we have to
Yeah.
think about all these facets of our own society and everybody who makes up the society. Well, my kid's not going to do that. Well, why don't you let the kid determine what the kid wants to do? Maybe
Yeah.
that changes. We do have changes in our careers. But that was another thing because all of a sudden we have these academic reforms that tossed all of those out. And all of a sudden we get back into career technical education and STEM. And the career technical education is now a refined version of voc ed. And we have so many different forms of it that are coming on board. So we get rid of things only to bring them back and have to figure out ways of getting people who are trained enough to bring them back.
It's
It's,
that thing. It just changes, but it all stays the same.
yeah. And I believe that this is just another cycle.
I think it's a cycle too.
I think,
I really believe in schools though. We have to make big changes because we can't keep on this bell ringing thing. Is everybody in the everybody can hear it knows it's wrong. They
here's what
know.
I would like. Here's what I would like.
Yeah.
I would like schools to have to jettison anybody who never had a teaching certificate. I would like schools to have everybody who is an administrator have to go back to the classroom for 2 years before they can have another administrative job. The other thing I want people to do is, as a community, take a look at their school's administration and ask yourself, why do we have an epidemic of teachers leaving when we have an overabundance of administrators who should be in the classroom? So they should cut admin and put them back in the classroom. Wouldn't that solve a lot of the problem? Because in the district that I left, they are getting more and more and more admin to the point where their boardroom is no longer sufficient because they have to pack more people in. And so it's a hoarder's nightmare or dream,
Really, the boardroom's bad.
depending on, well, I guess maybe it's my nightmare. A hoarder would be thrilled because you can't move around. There are so many people that they have to farm out offices in other schools into the schools. And this is a huge building. And so they have to do the board meetings now at another school. The whole intent of getting this building was so that there was more than enough room for people to move around freely, for the school district to grow in a reasonable fashion. And we would have that because the district only has two high schools.
Mhm.
But then if you take a look at how the staff, how you have a growing number of administrators in the district, a shrinking number of teachers, and a shrinking number of classified. So the question becomes, what is behind this growth of administration?
That's a good question.
Maybe this is something we need to bring up.
We should. I would like to know how many different jobs have been created in the last, say, 20 years.
Mm-hmm. In administration
Yeah.
at the expense of teaching. Okay.
Yeah. It'd be interesting.
So have we come very far from a nation at risk? We have. We've made leaps and bounds. We've worked on the achievement gap, and I think that's the most germane point, but we
It's
still need to
mainstream.
work on bringing that down. Where are we going to be in another 10 years? That would be interesting.
Yeah. Oof. Smaller schools, smaller schools. I just can't cry it enough. I'm working in a lot of big schools all over, and they're beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
many of them, but they're big.
And impersonal.
They're impersonal. They are impersonal. And I worked in such a personal sort of small setting school. I just can't imagine going to school and kind of not knowing everybody in a way, at least a little
Right.
bit. Not like, who are you? You've been going here 2 years? I don't even know who you are. You know, that's odd. But yeah.
But I've known students who sat next to other kids for an entire semester and had no idea who they were.
Well, that's true too. Well,
And
really,
I
even in the
was
small setting, I mean, we used to give them a
in
hard
a
time. You don't
small
know their
group
name
setting.
yet, guy. We've been here. You don't
In a
work with this
small
for a
group
month
setting.
now. Oh,
I
really?
had this one girl who was she was so her into Tumblr, and she was into her like at that time it was like a little Game Boy kind of thing. And I was talking to her because I had my one-on-one service that I was doing, and this other girl was sitting there, and I said, "Is there who in your math class could you go to ask this question?" She said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, you're in groups in that class because I know your class." And she said, "I don't know." I said, "Who's in your group?" She said, "I have absolutely no idea." And the girl sitting next to her in this conversation looked at her and said, "I have been tutoring you all year long." She goes, "Who are you?" And she said, "Are you effing kidding me?"
No kidding.
And the girl just kind of gave a nervous laugh and she said, "I never looked you in the face before."
Oh my gosh. Oh, help us all.
I've had kids in my program where we never had more than 40 kids, but I had all these, and half of those kids were on my team and the other half were on
Yeah.
another teacher's team.
Yeah.
And we would do all these community things. And I would say, "Could you hand this over to so and so?" And it would be, say, March or April of the year. And they'd both been there all year. And they said, "Who's that?" And so it's just so odd. And
I
they go,
never had that. Of course, we didn't have the telephones at the time. Yeah, they just weren't around.
"Mm-hmm."
Yeah. You effing kidding me? I never
She
looked up
was
at your
fit to
face.
be tied.
Well, yeah. I'm a human being. Oh my gosh. This phone thing is bad, but that's another. Yeah, we all know it. We should stop. I've
This
stopped.
was in
Uh,
this was in 2010,
oh, that was, yeah. It's still, yeah.
either 2009 or 10. Yeah, in the spring. It was really, really odd.
It got people too. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I know adults that just like all of a sudden they were just stuck in their phone. They were Blackberries at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whew, that just took
Yep.
over.
Exactly. Okay. So we will wrap up, and just for everybody, make sure that you subscribe, leave us a review, and make sure that you check for our next episode, which will be coming at you next week. We do have a whole catalog of older episodes, and at some point, we will be on YouTube. So check us out there. Okay. And so, Philip, once again, I will say adios.
Aloha.
And we are off.